Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and I am back with another deck tech, this one concerning Escalation. It was supposed to come out last week at the time of recording, but things got a little out of hand and it just ended up getting pushed back. But now we're going to finally tackle this. This is a deck that I find to be quite fun, although in a competitive sense, I don't think this is going to be a legitimate deck. Regardless, this is a deck built solely around Machines of War. Machines of War is essentially a way that allows us to cheat out big Soviet infantry very quickly, and we have a deck essentially built around that, and we're essentially taking Soviet value and then adding this ability to have really big swing turns in the mid game. Because it's only pulling Soviet infantry, we actually only have to build a little of our deck around it. And we do lose out on maybe one or two really powerful infantry units, but we can replace those, and the potential upside of Machines of War of pulling out certain big infantry can be quite powerful. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into the deck tech. We start out with ZHUKOV. ZHUKOV is essentially a similar card to Machines of War, being able to pull out a big Soviet infantry quickly. ZHUKOV is something that you're generally going to play in a turn 5, turn 6 era, as you're just going to only be able to afford the infantry, even with the discount, around that time, but still being able to pay 1 credit to draw an infantry unit and playing a 5 cost massive guard can be quite powerful. So he acts almost like a 4th copy of Machines of War. Road to Berlin acts as, very simply, some good healing. We have a few cheaper ways to activate this, but even just activating it once or twice makes Road to Berlin pretty good value-wise. You're able to heal, 1 credit to heal maybe 3 or 6 defense is good, and there is a much higher ceiling. In long games, this can activate 3, 4, maybe even 5 or more times, and that's a lot of healing to come out of a 1 credit card. It's a good healing card and one of the better that Soviets can run when they can't run infantry. Next up, we have Bloody Sickle. Bloody Sickle is just a staple card. I probably don't need to explain much about this, but it's just a really good way to ping off low health units, cycles itself. The 1 damage to your HQ is pretty inconsequential. It's overall just a very, very solid card. Then we have Observer Corps. Observer Corps is a very important card for this deck, and is probably one of the biggest reasons to go as a British ally. The big power behind Observer Corps is the simple fact that you're able to take something like Machines of War and play it turn 3, and that can be quite powerful. Being able to power that out so quickly has just won me games if the enemy is not able to remove that guard effectively, or one of our big Soviet infantry effectively, and it's proven to be probably one of the biggest power plays of the deck. Also has the benefit of just being able to discount any big card we have, which can help us just have extra flexibility. Then we have Mobile Defense. Mobile Defense is one of these early defensive tools because we're able to put out those 2 T-70s. We're not doing a whole lot in the early game, so having Mobile Defense out in order to sort of block the enemy aggression, and then potentially and then on the next turn being able to trade with those can be quite powerful. Next up, we have Red Banner. Red Banner serves as a powerful tool that is able to combo specifically well with some of our large tier infantry. All the infantry we run in this deck are 8 credits, meaning that if we use Red Banner on them, they all get converted into an IS-2. Obviously, one of the most standout examples is the 272nd Guards, which, if you Red Banner, gives you 2 IS-2s. That is quite the powerful effect, and Red Banner just offers that extra late-game value and can be very annoying I've actually won a few games from using Red Banner on one of my weakened infantry in the front line, and then turning that into an IS-2, and the enemy just has no way to get it out of the front line. So it's a very useful order. You can also, in emergencies, use it alongside something like Mobile Defense or a few other cards in order to make it a little bit better. But otherwise, it's mainly there to combo with their big infantry. Then we have 2 copies of the Hammer. The Hammer is just a very basic removal order. I've opted for the less flexible but more powerful Hammer because I want to be able to make sure I can kill whatever big ground threat is on the board and remove it effectively without leaving it over and needing to do something else to deal with it. But there is an argument that there are a few other Soviet orders that could probably fill this slot. Similar thing exists for the 52K. The 52K serves as sort of our anti-air unit. Being able to put out a small body, but mainly this is an air counter, obviously. But being able to deal 4 damage removes most early game air units, and the few that it doesn't, often you can combo it with Bloody Sickle, and it will kill almost every air unit within the game, and that's quite powerful. Being able to pay 4 credits to essentially, kill any air unit is quite powerful, and you also get a body, and you get the draw card, so it's a nice thing, and you only really spend maybe 1 card, at least from your hand, to deal with it. Then the 52K is just really flexible and helps to cover that weakness the Soviets almost have always had, where they just have a hard time dealing with air. Then we get on to another British card, the SEAFORTH Highlanders. The Highlanders, although they are an infantry, they are not a Soviet infantry, so they do not get pulled by machines of war. And that's really nice, because SEAFORTH Highlanders is a really good guard, but if we were paying 5 credits for it, it wouldn't be that strong. Instead, the big effect is the fact that we're able to just play this really large guard with little downside. And that's very important to make sure we have a good defensive back end to help control and keep the game from spiraling too far out of our ability to deal with it. So SEAFORTH Highlanders is just a really good guard. We also have the T-60. The T-60 is very useful, as not only is it a guard, but it is also some late game value, giving us extra units through the T-34 1942 it gives upon destruction, and that is extremely useful to just be flexible and use it as we need it. You're able to potentially use this to help remove enemy units from the front line. Maybe you can use this to add more pressure to the board, and it's just in general is a nice way to get some extra value out of units. Having multiple units in one card is really good for this deck to make sure we have that little bit of extra value in it. Then we also have Blackwatch. Blackwatch is one of those cards that is very good at shutting down certain decks, especially with the surge that was combo decks in the last couple weeks after the OCC was won by it. Combo decks have become a lot more popular, and as such, Blackwatch becomes even more valuable because a well-timed Blackwatch can just absolutely end the game for a combo deck. If you hit 2 or 3 of their orders, they often don't have the ability to have enough credits to go off, or they have to spend so much time that you can mount more pressure. They work especially very well in tandem with something like Machines of War, as our big infantry get even more difficult to deal with if Blackwatch has made the enemy's hand much more expensive, and it makes it harder for the enemy to respond to our board. Then we have the titular card, Machines of War. This is the card we've kind of built our deck around, or at least we've built our infantry around it. The targets that Machines of War has is not the best, I will admit. We only have really 2 to 3 options, but those options all contain guard or blitz. And I'll talk about, which ones I think are the best. But it offers just a nice sort of tempo in the mid game, a big tempo swing where you cheat out a very big guard. The fact that it essentially draws it from your deck is also nice because it means that we don't have to have the unit in hand, which is a big problem with some of these cards that would let you cheat units out, is that you had to draw them also, and it made it too inconsistent. Machines of War, very consistent as long as you don't draw all of your infantry, which is why we need to at least have, I would say, at least about 5 infantry units in our deck to really make worth it, because the consistency of Machines of War is very, very important. We then have the KV-1 1941. The KV-1 is a good way to also punish certain combo decks. Namely, decks that try to draw a lot will find themselves having a lot of problems with the KV-1. Also good at pressuring slower control decks a little bit. I do think that this one is arguably not that good. Our deck's already kind of slow and kind of heavy on value, or decently heavy on value. And the KV-1 doesn't add a whole lot to that because we're not often beating the enemy to death, or if we are, then the extra damage from the KV doesn't really matter. So maybe there is room to change this out for something else, and we'll talk about those replacements in a moment. We have a single copy of Lend-Lease as a big card draw. Lend-Lease serves, simply put, to just give us a big refill late game. It is a bit expensive to play out. Paying 7 credits is something that can be difficult to do in certain matchups. But drawing 4 cards can give us a lot of value and make sure we don't ever really run out of steam even later in the game. Then we have Carpet Bombing. This is a standard British card. Carpet Bombing gives us just 2 board clears that are quite powerful. Very useful in combination with something like Machines of War, as you can play out one of our big infantry units and then a turn or 2 later board clear with Carpet Bombing. In the same vein, we have Winter Offensive. This is essentially the Soviet carpet bombing. It does hit our own stuff, making it a little harder to play out, but it also has that benefit of sometimes dealing damage direct. It does deal 4 damage to the enemy HQ. It's overall, though, still really flexible, because if the enemy blows up our big infantry, we can kind of just nuke the board with Winter Offensive and reset it, and then rebuild from there. Getting onto our infantry roster, we have the 272nd Guards. This is probably the single best infantry to pool in the game. Simply put, the 272nd Guards has just a lot of variety and value in it. Obviously, it's a guard itself. You can now pull it with Machines of War, and when it dies, it gives the IS-2. I've talked about the combination with Red Banner previously, and that is quite a powerful win con. But overall, 272nd is just probably the best infantry the Soviets have to combo with Machines of War. The other infantry we're using is the 25th Infantry Regiment. This one is essentially a 6/7 guard, and then it adds an infantry to the board at the end of every turn, similar to the Soviet elite train. So the 25th is not as strong when on its own, but thanks to Machines of War, the fact that it has guard pushes it to the point that it is probably the second best option next to 272nd Guards. And that gives 25th some usefulness. The light infantry and the constant spawning of light infantry also gives you a little bit of flexibility. They can be really annoying for the enemy, and they can fill up your support line or push into the front line and take that, and just offer a little bit of pressure here and there alongside it. And then the final card we have in the deck is the ISU 152. This serves as another similar board clear. We don't have a lot of ways to use this, but namely through the use of something like Bloody Sickles, we can often use the ISU to blow up numerous damaged enemy units, and that allows it to act as a potent board clear. With that is my current deck list, but I will say that it is important we discuss some other cards to consider, as there is actually a fair amount, and I think it's important that it needs to be experimented with to find the best combination. So starting off, let's talk about other pools with Machines of War. One option is potentially First Rifles. First Rifles is not the biggest infantry unit, but it is a lot of stats. And honestly, it is probably another decent option to add to the Soviet to pull from machines of war, as 2 guards is quite sticky, but it just doesn't add as much punch. And personally, I prefer the 25th at least over it. But if you ended up cutting stuff and wanted more infantry in the deck, first rifles is a decent option. There is maybe the potential to consider 60th Cavalry Regiment. It doesn't have guard, but it does have that very annoying effect, and you could even consider trying to make Machines of War into a toolbox where it pulls out a variety of infantry, and some of them being big, but some of them also just being very annoying effects like 60th Cavalry. It could be an option to try out. But the main ones you probably are looking at in terms of pulling just big infantry is 17th Rifle is the third option, I would say, compare alongside the 272nd and 25th. 17th Rifle Regiment has Blitz, meaning that if you have the 2 credits to spend, you're able to immediately move and attack with it or move it into the front line. The fact that it repairs means that pulling it out early can also be quite powerful. I think the biggest problem with Rifle Regiment is that 2 operation cost. It's just a little expensive, and if we can't operate it with Blitz, it's essentially pulling out a 5/5 infantry, and that's just kind of not good. I think it's really important with Machines of War that we're able to use them. They're immediately able to impact the board, and that's why I think guard is the most important keyword. And in fact, that's why I would suggest the first rifles as a infantry if you wanted to include one. The rest of the infantry are not good to pull with, I don't think. There's just not a whole lot here. But, those 1 or 2 options could be considered. Other options to look at are the BP-43 Armored Train. The Armored Train could easily swap place with the KV-1. In fact, I think that's a better idea because the BP-43 gives us a big tank guard, and we're more interested in this defensive value than we are in the little bit of extra damage from the KV-1. It is also could be considered to play the KV-1 1939. It's a relatively large tank guard, and notably, the balance patches that is coming out in a few days is going to make the 1939 a lot stickier because a very prominent bounce card is being removed. Namely the 99th Battalion is being reworked into something different. So the KV-1 actually is getting some extra benefit, and tank guards are going up pretty big because they're now pretty immune to being bounced. So this could potentially make the KV-1 1939 a card to actually consider. So that is an option. In terms of other options, there's not a whole lot. You could actually consider the PE2FT, which blocks deployment effects. If we look at the options for our deck, there's not a lot of deployment effects. Really, we have the 52Ks and the Black Watches and ISU 152. So about 4 or 5 units. And although those effects are powerful, the shutting down enemy deployment effects could be potentially quite powerful. It is also a more proactive 3 or 4 drop, which is something that we don't have a lot of, so could be something to consider. The I-15 Chaika, or Chaika, I'm butchering that name absolutely, I know, but the I-15 could be another option. It's a proactive 2 drop. Gives us a sticky set of fighters. Could be good for early game trading. Could also play Yak 9, because this would give us a 5 drop, and although it is a bit slow, it does give us card draw in the deck, and that might be a worthwhile inclusion. Other options could include cards like Heroes of the Soviet Union, and if you wanted some more value, you could pull out more big Soviet infantry, or could find some Soviet infantry that you otherwise wouldn't run. You could also look into considering copies of, where are they? Night Witches is potentially an option, or something like Parade. These are two value options that Night Witches adds a slow but a lot of extra removal to your deck, which could be potentially quite useful. Or we could do Parade and copy so a lot of high impact units, like an extra Blackwatch can be game ending. There is also From the People. From the People could potentially replace copies of Hammer or 52K. It is more flexible but less powerful, so you'd have to weigh your options if you wanted to play that. I think the Hammer and 52K are overall more powerful. By the Sword is actually a pretty good option for card draw, which is, I will note, probably one of the bigger weaknesses of the deck. By the Sword gives us a series of card draw that could be quite useful. And I think that you could easily find room for it by cutting one or two cards here and there. And that extra card draw could be very, very useful. We also have potentially Workers Unite. It's card draw, but it's also a little bit of ramp, and because we're looking to play out big cards, it could be quite useful to have Workers Unite to kind of work on both those game plans. It is another option. And then you also have Tractor Factory. Tractor Factories is a really powerful board flood late game. Adding those double T-34s is potentially quite good and could definitely be considered if you're looking for more value. On the British side, there's not a whole lot I would consider. The main thing I would probably look at is Fortification. This deck does have a bit of a problem with healing, so Fortification could be a good option to help fix that. If you shuffled this deck around a little bit, you could maybe drop the Lend-Lease, run 2 Fortifications to get that nice amount of healing, but just make sure to have Soviet card draw in there to help replace that. But otherwise, that is the deck. As I said at the beginning, I don't think this deck is a meta force. It's just a little bit too inconsistent, and the pulls of the infantry from machines, although good, don't end games, at least not normally. So there is, I think, a ways to go. But I do think that at some sort of it is a fun alternative to standard Soviet value, and makes use of one of the cool new escalation cards. But also make sure to just experiment. Don't take this specific deck at face value, as there is just there's a lot of wiggle room to try stuff out, and I definitely think that this needs some further refinement from where I'm at the moment, and just adapt the deck as you need it. But otherwise, let's just go right into those couple matches that I have for you today. And that is it for this deck tech. I know it was maybe a fewer games than I normally have done, but I am still just busy real life at the moment, so I just have to kind of make just a couple games just to show off some basic ideas of the deck. Did get a good example of how that 25th Infantry was actually able to kind of help snowball the game. Which was kind of an interesting thing. And then we kind of got blown over due to our lack of healing, which is why I probably should include some fortifications within the deck to make sure we have healing. And I'll probably tinker with this more. If I make any further refinements to the deck, they'll be down in the deck code in the description. But otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe. I have some other videos, and I definitely have some other deck ideas, especially with that balance patch that is going to be coming out in a few days. So you don't want to miss that. In fact, I'll probably have another deck tech video this week talking about a deck that I'm going to be trying after the balance patch goes live. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching, and have a good day.